Hello, and welcome to today's American Nuclear Society event, Unlocking Africa's Potential with Nuclear Energy. I'm Dan Goldberg. I'm the Director of Programs for ANS, and on behalf of the organization, I will be moderating today's discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few ground notes regarding today's event. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A function. I will attempt to address as many questions as possible, though due to time constraints, we may not get to all of the questions. The event will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to event registrants later today or by Monday. Additionally, certificates of attendance for the event are available by request. I'll go ahead and put the contact information in the chat in a few moments to request those certificates. And finally, we ask that all participants adhere to the ANS Code of Ethics and Respectful Behavior Policy, which can be found at ans.org. With those notes out of the way, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. First off, we have Seth Kofi Deborah, who is currently an Associate Professor of Nuclear Engineering at the University of Ghana. He is the Technical Director of the Nuclear Power Institute of the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission. Next, we have Alicia Duncan, who currently serves as the Deputy Assistant Director for International Cooperation in the Office of Nuclear Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. She is also currently serving as the Chair of the International Framework for Nuclear Energy Cooperation. And last but not least, we have Rebecca Tadasi, who is the head of the Division of Radioactive Waste Management and Decommissioning at the Nuclear Energy Agency. She is responsible for advancing information exchange and studies in the fields of radioactive waste management, nuclear facility decommissioning, and legacy management. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate this great group of panelists, and I'm going to go ahead and kick off the presentations and discussions, turning to Seth first. If you don't mind turning on your video, we'll give you a few moments to discuss nuclear initiatives that you're involved in. Welcome, and thank you, Seth, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dan. And good evening, or good afternoon, good morning, wherever you connecting from. I also like to thank the other panelists, this call, and also ANS for bringing this up. I think this topic has come at the right time. I will not delve so much into what we are doing because I think that's more of public knowledge, and I will focus on some few things, basically where we are as Africa and why we need nuclear power currently. So my first point I would like to make is Africa is resource rich. I mean, this is no secret, and because of that, in past times, Africa has been a point where other continents gets resource to also develop their economy. Even though it's rich, it's wealthy. I won't even call it rich because I think Africa is wealthy in terms of resources. It's unfortunately it's energy poor. We know that about 43% of the population of the continent don't have access to electricity. Per capita of electricity on the continent average about 200 kilowatts hour, as compared to thousands if you look at Americas, if you look at other continents. So this is a challenge. And if we want to develop as a country, if you want to develop as a continent, I think we need to bring up energy to a certain level of appreciation to be able to continue development, even develop much faster. There is potential, and there is great potential to develop Africa, or to have Africa be where it's supposed to be among the community of nations or community of continents. But to be able to do this, I like to call I would like to call a dense green energy source that is affordable, sustainable, and safe. and such a source, I will call it a DGE for transformation, dense green energy for transformation. And that is what I find in nuclear. Yes, the REs, or we have good resources in terms of sun, in terms of the wind, so renewables are good, but we need something that is dense. We need something that can propel the continent. And that energy source is not in RE, and that's the fact. That energy source is in nuclear. You can talk about coal, but again, we go back to climate change, where climate change is staring us in the face as a continent, or even as a global threat. We currently saw an enormous downpour of rain in Kenya, in other parts of the continent, and even other parts of the globe. And even though Africa contributes less in terms of carbon emissions, that doesn't mean we have to put more because we contribute less. That should mean that Africa should be responsible in its energy source or choosing its energy source. And if we want to grow, we want to industrialize, then that DGE for transformation, that dense green energy for transformation in nuclear needs to be looked at, and needs to be looked at well. Nuclear don't just present an opportunity, and people keep asking, yes, you have renewable, you have a lot of resources in terms of sun, in terms of wind, but why do you want to do nuclear? And that's one thing that people, or some people, may not get it. We are not just talking about industrialization, we are talking about putting the future of our continent in the hands of the youth. Africa is the most youthful continent when you talk about continents. And if we are not able to put jobs, meaningful jobs, into the hands of people, where we are talking about just transition in the climate change sector, and if all the engineers that we have in the oil and gas industry are going to be reduced just because we need to we need to move from our current source of energy, then we need to actually move these people to jobs that are responsible, create new jobs. And one of the biggest way we can actually do this is through nuclear. We are not just talking about direct jobs, we are talking about the indirect jobs that even go beyond the direct jobs that we currently have in the nuclear sector. We need to put our youth to work. We have an advantage when it comes to the nuclear power, or the implementation of nuclear power, because the youth are willing to put in the work. The youth are willing to bring something to the table, to show up, to show that they are capable of doing what is needed to make sure that this continent sits on, or kind of sits at the place where it's supposed to be. And doing that, we look at the non-electric applications also, in terms of production of hydrogen, where ammonia is, production of hydrogen for ammonia, where we can use it in the fertilizer industry. Yes, Africa is one of the arable lands in terms of how or where things can grow properly. But we have farmed these lands for quite a long time. We need to fertilize, we need to bring the nitrogen, the phosphorus there back into the soil. And one of the biggest way to do that is through the application of fertilizer. And we can use hydrogen to produce, or to get ammonia into fertilizer production, which would be a big gain, a big boost for the continent. Through nuclear energy, over 50% of the continent's population don't have access to clean water, which is not unacceptable. It's something that we need to look at critically. And we see that to enhance the livelihood of people, we can actually have desalination through our nuclear power plants, or through potential nuclear power plants on the continent, and bring clean water to people, also enhance the livelihood of people. So the potential for nuclear is huge on the continent. Our development partners, advanced countries, should support the continent in the development of this technology to improve human life. And again, I think this conversation is long overdue. And thank you, Ernest, and the panelists for bringing this to the fore for us to discuss this and make sure that we kind of propel whatever is being done on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Seth. Appreciate the comments and forward to continuing the discussion in Q&A. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Marshall, our Vice President and President-elect for ANS, to continue the conversation. Hello and welcome, Lisa.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Lisa Marshall, ANS VP, President-elect, also an Assistant Extension Professor at North Carolina State's Nuclear Engineering Program, and your moderator. Our next speaker will be Alicia Duncan, Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Cooperation in the Office of Nuclear Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the ANS for inviting me to speak on this panel. Lisa, thank you. And Dan, you're a rock star, flexible and resilient, just like nuclear. So I want us to build on what Seth has already stated. And the US government as a whole has really ramped up its efforts on the continent. My colleagues and friends at the State Department, even Exim Bank has visited, USTDA, Commerce, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. All of us have really leaned in on supporting the development of a nuclear power program on the continent. And I say a program because a project is just that, and a program is definitely a holistic view of what is needed in order for there to be a readiness in both government and industry to deploy new nuclear. And that is a process that can take many, many years. And so while we are behind the curve, we have gotten started in a major way. And I'm very pleased that we've had such a great partnership with the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission, specifically NPI under Seth's leadership, because it has afforded us the opportunity to launch our Regional Clean Energy Training Center, which therefore brings government, industry, academia, and our national laboratory partners together to start those conversations in workforce development and capacity building, as well as offer education, training, and those linkages with our industry, national laboratories, and academia and government to support Ghana. And when we talk about the continent of Africa, of course, that's many diverse countries with many diverse needs and abilities. But Ghana has stood out for us as a leader on the continent, one, because of their ability to organize and organize well. Two, the fact that they are the country that has really been forward-leaning in not only wanting to really develop a program, but also to help others on the continent to do the same. And this is a critical factor because we know that this is a very complex and challenging undertaking. And therefore, to have a country say, we want to do it and we want to help our neighbors do it too, is critically important. And as we look down the broader spectrum, we know that there's not just Ghana that has to really roll up its sleeves and carry the burden and leadership on this. There's also, we need to bring in the East and make sure that our friends in Kenya and other places are really working to support the entirety of the continent, because this is something that we want to be there for the long term. The relationship in nuclear is more than a 100-year relationship. And we want to make sure as a strategic partner that we're able to support our friends and make sure that they are developing that energy security that has been demonstrated that we all need to shore up. I was very pleased last year when we launched our inaugural US African Nuclear Energy Summit, and Ghana's president made a very strong statement about Ghana's desire to pursue nuclear. And we've been closely engaged with the Minister of Energy, the Minister of Environment, the GAIAC team under the leadership of DG Dampare. And we want to continue to make sure that we are investing in the people so that dividend will grow and the people will be able to lead this initiative on their own for decades and decades and decades to come. Seth mentioned a stat about young Africans, but I want to take that stat a bit further and note that just shortly, I believe in 2020, young Africans are projected to constitute 42% of the global youth. And as we all speak as countries about our need for more human capacity, we know that we're all going to need to be hiring. So when people ask me the question, why Africa? I'm immediately aware of their short-sightedness. When we have a talent pool, and I always say Africa has more engineers in their fingernail than other countries, including the United States. And it's not just engineers that, support a nuclear project. There are so many other professions, both technical, skilled, and academic, human resources, financial, the list goes on, that support the infrastructure that goes into nuclear. And therefore, we know that when we're trying to support these countries, develop their workforce, there's a breadth of experience and expertise that they will need to have. And so we've looked at how we can be supportive since the kickoff that we did last October. We will be following that up with an industry readiness event in Kenya at the end of August, again, under the auspices of the Regional Clean Energy Training Center, which is led by NPI under Seth's direction, under the leadership of the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission. And therefore, we know that there's a lot to do. But our efforts, as I mentioned, are an interagency-wide effort. Our partnerships continue to grow with the African countries, and we recognize that there is a true value add, true partnership. This is not just us getting something or giving something. This is a partnership, because then we can go and take that and work with other countries. We can duplicate and replicate these models. We can provide the modeling and simulation so that the Ghanaians, the Kenyans, and others on the continent can go ahead and start to make all of these determinations as they flesh out their energy plans. And we will continue to work in close partnership because we know that there's a lot to do, and Africa is a potential that is worth unlocking.
Thank you, Alicia. Our next speaker, before we open it up for discussion, will be Rebecca Tadasi. She is the head of the Division of Radioactive Waste Management and Decommissioning at the Nuclear Energy Agency. She is responsible for advancing information exchange and studies in the fields of radioactive waste management, nuclear facility decommissioning, and legacy management.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ines, for giving me the opportunity to present and have this panel discussion. And thank you, Lisa. I'm going to be talking about what NEA is doing in terms of skill development in Africa and other activities. As we know that there's 1/3 of the African countries have integrated nuclear energy as plans for their development objective by increasing electricity supply, industrializing their economies, and reducing emission. While renewable energy will be a key component to the African energy future, nuclear technology can offer a source of low carbon energy. To build a successful nuclear energy programs, African countries will need to develop the necessary capacity, policy, and regulatory frameworks that will address the opportunities and also the responsibilities associated with nuclear energy development. No international cooperation program exists that addresses these needs in a holistic manner that reflects broader policy and economic development priorities. Therefore, the OECD NEA and the OECD Development Center is trying to fill that gap by establishing what we consider the Common Journey Initiative, which is advancing economic development and skills expansion in Africa. The Common Journey effort is aimed to help address these needs by establishing a policy dialogue platform for knowledge sharing and capacity building to ensure safe, secure, and gender balanced nuclear deployment that supports Africa's sustainable economical development. This effort is designed by OECD Practice for International Cooperation and African nations interested in developing nuclear programs by serving as a forum for sharing and analyzing information among governments, universities, businesses in African countries, creating mutually beneficial partnership relevant to organization in OECD countries, building technical skills to meet industrial and economic needs, facilitating communication and stakeholders and the public, supporting diverse, inclusive, gender-balanced generation of experts. This initiative aims to leverage the knowledge and skills organizations such as NEA could bring to assist the advancement of Africa. The principle behind the initiative is that OECD countries that in Africa can share a common interest in leveraging nuclear technology to enhance the quality of life for all individuals and protecting the global environment. For many countries, it will be essential to simultaneously work developing renewable energy sources while exploring the potential for nuclear energy. Likewise, nuclear technology may be targeting to address diverse needs in each country. The latest advancements in nuclear energy, specifically on SMRs and advanced microreactor, offer a chance to supplement the renewable energy supply and contribute to reducing energy-related emission in Africa to align with the continent's net zero goals. These reactors that vary in design from less than 1 megawatt to hundreds of megawatts can be used to support baseload and decentralized power generation, as well as heat processing, desalination, and other industrial uses. Several potential benefits to the next generation nuclear technology make deployment of these technology attractive options for achieving development goals in Africa. The promotion of international cooperation is essential to ensure safe, secure, and gender-balanced deployment of nuclear technology, which in turn supports economic development. Collaboration, knowledge sharing among relevant government entities in areas such as regulation, policy, and education will greatly benefit African countries that exploring nuclear energy development. This collaboration would not only help build local human resources and developing value chains, but also contribute to the overall success and development of Africa. With its young and growing population, abundant natural resources, Africa has the potential for rapid development. The Common Journey Initiative aims to utilize advanced technologies to drive development in Africa while minimizing emissions that harm the global environment. The progress and prosperity of Africa is vital to the well-being of the entire world. So therefore, NEA and OECD Development Center is here to help and support in any of the activities that will support the nuclear energy development within the continent, and working with Alicia and also with Seth and the different programs, we're able to develop a comprehensive training programs and also collaborations using the platforms that we already have within the NEA with the various technical groups that we house. We will be able to support these initiatives, and we see a lot of opportunities for collaboration and development. With that, thank you very much.
I want to thank all of our speakers for their opening remarks, and I want to also thank the individuals who are on this webinar for putting into the chat their various questions. We're going to start to go to some of those questions. If you want to add to the discussion, please go to the discussion board, the chat, and put in those questions and comments for us to read through and bring into the discussion. So the first question, what type of nuclear professionals do you need to support the efforts on the continent with regards to nuclear energy production? operators, nuclear engineering, doctorals, masters, etc. So for a better understanding of the diversity of the nuclear professionals that are needed. So Seth, you're on mute.
So sorry about that. I guess I can start. I think the other colleagues can add on or even have a different perspective if that's possible. I think whenever we start talking about nuclear, the first thing that comes to mind is why don't we build masters and PhD students? That's great, but that's always at a high level, and that's how we started, of course. But moving forward, if we really want to make an impact in it, I think we need to look critically at the technical side, and that's what Alicia spoke about the Clean Energy Training Center. Even though he's doing other things, one of the major focus is to have a training of the technical staff. So you're talking about welders, you're talking about masonry, you're talking about instrumentation. So these are things that are key, that are most important. Moreover, we need a lot of some people in engineering, but not just in nuclear engineering. Nuclear engineering is just about 10% of the people that works in a nuclear power plant. We need other engineers, electrical engineers, the chemical engineers, the geomatic, the geodetic engineers. We need civil engineers. We need the mechanical engineers. We need biologists. We need chemists. So nuclear is not just meant for a group of people, a group of professionals. It cuts across. You will need people who have to talk. The communicators and all those people are needed within a nuclear industry. So yes, it's good to develop the masters and PhD in the nuclear field, but there are other fields that we need to look at, and we need to look at critically if we want to make an impact on the continent and to an extension the globe. We need to look at not just also the degrees and the masters and the PhDs, but also at the technical level. So in Ghana, we look at what we call the TVET, where you are looking at the trades people. What can we do with them? Because we need to build the plant and we need to maintain the plant once it's in operation. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the other panelists to turn on their video? Wonderful. Another question that
So Lisa, we were told to sort of keep them off so that we can maintain the bandwidth situation that we're all struggling with. So as we speak, we'll turn them on. But if you were going to go to the next question, or could I just add a bit more to what was said?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I appreciate, Seth, you're running through all of those professions. And I'll note that you've mentioned sort of the labor, what people consider labor skill sets, which are equally important. And I would add that one of the things that I've been echoing as I speak on the subject is that regardless of some of these degreed professions that are in the STEM fields, is that we need to make sure that regardless of how many engineers and STEM field we have, that we are also making sure that people are trained in leadership, because we're looking at a time where a lot of the knowledge is retiring, and we are going to rely on a younger, much less experienced workforce. And we need those people to step up. And a leader is not just someone who's in a position, but all of them are going to need to be able to be leaders to get these policies pushed through, to make sure that in situations where decisions need to be made, that there's someone to step up and make them. And therefore, we need to make sure we're looking at the skill sets that some will consider soft skills, others like myself will consider critical skills. That's a word Lisa Landy at the IAEA uses. I think that there's an opportunity as we look at this type of training that must accompany as we prepare people to lead the innovation that is coming, is that we can take the best and the brightest minds, but if they don't have that ability that Seth talked about to communicate, then they're going to be challenged. They're going to struggle and things will not get done. This is not an easy thing. It is a very complex thing to do these type of nuclear projects. And there are a lot of hard conversations and hard decisions that have to be made throughout. the life cycle of a plant. So therefore, we want to make sure that we are preparing our people, young, old, or middle. And I'm not going to say old, I like the word seasoned, to be able to make sure that they are contributing. And I'll just say something, because I know on the continent that everybody wants their child to be a doctor or a lawyer. They don't want their children to be welders. We need to talk more about how important each profession is that goes into to contributing to a nuclear project. I'll give an example that on a recent visit, and I won't say which country, but I've only been to Ghana and Kenya in the past month. On a recent visit, I was told by a minister that they're paying $50,000 for 2 weeks for a welder to come. $50,000 US. We all know that welding is a skill set, a craft that is grossly underrepresented in the sector. And so therefore, I think that we need to make sure that everyone understands that all of these are vitally important. And again, as Seth underscored, that nuclear engineers make up a very, very small fraction of the workforce that is needed in one specific project.
Thank you, Alicia. Going to another question here. What kinds of regulatory hurdles are there in technology sharing and deployment between U.S. entities and corporations and governments in Ghana and elsewhere on the continent? How can these potential challenges be overcome?
Well, I guess I'll start there, and I'll be very brief. I see Seth has already turned the camera on, and I said I definitely wasn't going to speak on something that Seth could speak on. But quickly, I'll say, the export control requirements that come with partnering with the United States exists and will remain. There had been delays that we had experienced previously, and our colleagues have worked very diligently to reduce those timeframes. But we want to be mindful of intellectual property. We want to be mindful of all of the requirements that come with technology transfer, and therefore those requirements will remain the requirements. I think that it's really important that when you think about, as I mentioned, a 100-year relationship, that the strategic partnership is one that is based on trust, and therefore we obviously would work very closely with our partners on the continent to be able to make sure that those requirements are understood and agreed to and adhered to. But I'll let Seth speak more about the challenges that would be experienced on the continent.
Thank you very much, Alicia. So it just an add-on, maybe more specific to Ghana, because the question posed had Ghana in there somewhere. Yes, we expect challenges within the regulatory space. Why? Because we have an industry that's very young. We have a regulator that's very young. It hasn't done this before. It's not going to be a sail-through, a smooth sail-through. We're going to have some bumps. One of the biggest bumps we're going to have is, how do we actually apply the regulations to make sure that they are doing the things the way the operator or the owner is doing what is needed to be done? How do we enforce it? How do we even review the documents that even comes in? And that's where as Alicia has rightly pointed out, the US NRC is working with the regulatory authority to make sure that they build the competencies. They make sure that they have the needed skill, the attitude, the knowledge to review, to license, to regulate whatever we are bringing into this country as a nuclear power. So yes, we envisage some challenges, but that shouldn't stop us in going forward. Nuclear itself, people say it's complicated. That's why we are there as engineers, as regulators, as policymakers, to make sure that we surmount these challenges and then make sure this power plant comes into play to propel the continent to the point where we need to propel it to. Thank you.
May I add?
Yes, please.
one of the things that the Common Journey is trying to accomplish is just exactly that. You know, when we have regulatory infrastructure, regulations could be put together, but how to implement them is the most difficult part. And through our platform, where we have 34 member countries that have extensive experience in implementing these regulatory infrastructures, could support how, you know, one of the lessons learned that they've had and how we can support them in terms of development of those guidance and standards such that they have an easier path than what some of us have gone throughout the 6 years of experience. So these are the type of things that we see as a forum where we can bring our experts from these countries and be able to support the development of policies, regulation, and infrastructure, as well as educational system. And one of the things also in education that's very important is that to consider social science as part of nuclear engineering, because one has to be able to communicate to the public what it is that they are selling or producing. So it's really important to integrate that social science studies as part of the nuclear engineering. And those are the type of things that we see having the opportunity to develop through this Common Journey perspective.
Thank you, Rebecca. Another question here is, what generation reactors are being considered for this initiatives? Gen 3, Gen 4 plus, Gen 3 plus, Gen 4.
For Ghana, we considering a Gen 3 plus, and to be more specific, not Gen 3 plus, but to be more specific, small modular reactors in addition. So we're looking at small modular reactors and Gen 3 plus. That's a straightforward answer. Thank you.
Another question revolves around the back end of the fuel cycle and what are the potentials path forward for dealing with spent nuclear fuel?
Just because that is my area, I'll take that question. I think it's important that countries have a national strategy before they begin development of nuclear energy, because it's important to have what your plans are in terms of storage, transport, disposal. Radioactive waste management has been in the countries that have been advanced for the past 60 years. We know the technology, we know what it takes to safely dispose of it, but we still need to work towards public acceptance and how to communicate those risks associated in how to manage it. And deep geological repositories now are in the process of being developed in a number of countries. So I think there is a knowledge out there, and for some countries it might be even an interesting concept to think about multinational repositories of countries come together and be able to dispose of their high-level wastes, and reprocessing is also an option that could be used. So there are some solutions, and I think what is needed is to have a strategic plan and from the get-go, think about the back end from the front end, and we'll be able to address those questions also within our work activities.
Thank you, Rebecca. Another question, Seth?
Yeah, just to add to what Rebecca said, to be specific for Ghana, because we are following the IEA milestone approach, and within the milestone approach, fuel cycle is an issue you need to address even in phase 1 before you prepare to even issue a bid in phase 2 and then construction in phase 3. So it's something that is taken into account from the beginning of the program implementation that you need to address. So for phase 1, what we did for the country was have a good idea of whatever technology is out there in terms of fuel cycle, in terms of the back end, and how it's been dealt with, and how would you want to, what is your preferred choice in terms of the back end approach. So these are things that you do, and then when you get to phase 2, you establish the needed policy and strategies to make sure that this is done, and then the owner operator can then take it up it's established or when it's construction of the plants and how to decommission. He also have to work on the final policy based on the national policy that's with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Another question here. Are regional partnerships practical at this time? For example, would it be possible for Ghana, Nigeria, and nearby countries to share in a first-of-a-kind nuclear power plant?
So I will answer part of that question, but I had expected that Seth would readily turn that camera on. So one of the, I think, practical in terms of the readiness aspect, the workforce development, the education and training, I think in terms of leveraging the resources and making sure that we get the best bang for our bucks and our time and spreading education and training as far and wide as we can, I think that it's important to leverage a regional approach. Therefore, we get to bring in that diversity of thought, as well as make sure that when expertise and best practices and lessons learned are being shared, we share them with a broad swath of the continent. As it relates to that specific part, which was at the end about having a few countries work together to have a central project, I wouldn't dare speak for what is practical or possible on the continent, because the continent country representative, one of which is here, can speak to that. But I think it's important when we're in these early phases and trying to provide this type of partnership and training and education, that in order to have the widest reach and impact and make sure these different countries are getting the same information, that it is better to do so in a regional approach with leadership of a country or two or three on a continent. Seth, you want to add to the specific end part of that question about countries working together?
Thank you very much, Alicia. So I'm just returning from an IEA expert mission in Nigeria. And maybe this is not the first time I've done this. I've done it on behalf of the agency for other countries. But there's one thing that's always stands out. You find out that challenges, I won't call it problem, they are challenges. Our challenges are similar. Our challenges are similar. So if our challenges are similar, then we need to harness all the resources that we have into a regional approach. It makes things much easier to deal with. We share the knowledge that we have, we share the challenges we have, and how to overcome those challenges. The only challenge I have with a regional, or let's say a continental approach, let me put it that way, is an institution that is not mandated to do what is supposed to do, to take up that responsibility. Because nuclear is a sovereign decision, and it needs to be done in such a way. If we have that approach and the countries are able to come together, all they need is a bond to make sure that they come together and do what is needed to be done to propel. You don't need every country to go nuclear. That is almost impossible. The fact is, some countries will go nuclear and support others. You have the nuclear power plants within some countries, within regions, within the economic blocks, to provide power to others, or even vice versa, from other sources. So these are things we need to look at. We need to share resources. We need to look at our challenges. We need to look at opportunities within the region and say, who is best suited to take this up? We are not saying everything is coming to Ghana, and that's how come you even see the US Africa Energy Summit now going to Kenya. We are not saying everything comes to Ghana or sit at one place. We are saying let's have a distribution of the resources based on our strengths and our capabilities, so that we will be able to support each other moving forward, have that regional approach, have that regional sense of belonging, and help each other.
Thank you, Seth. Another question, is South Africa involved in any programs across the continent, given that it has 2 reactors at the Coburg Power Station?
I'll just
I'm
say
not
quickly,
s- yeah,
we've
please,
not
please
had
do.
any participation from South Africa in our multilateral or international efforts. That's my response. Seth, did you want to add more?
Alicia, I was actually going to bring you into this together with Rebecca because I don't think that question was meant for me.
One. Okay, let's have another question. I want to thank the U.S. for assisting Africa to realize nuclear energy potential. In regards to this approach, could it be possible to deal with African Union agencies rather than the individual countries? This would accelerate the utilization of nuclear energy. For example, empowering African Commission on Nuclear Energy would make a huge difference.
Well, I'm glad that you got back to that question because that's a question that we get a lot, specifically around AFCON. And we have worked with AFCON, and they have been very active in the dialogue, I will say. And in fact, showed up at the inaugural meeting held in Ghana last year. But, Seth talked about mandate of organizations, and I think it would be useful if he would speak more to that because that is very smiling. That is something that comes up often, and I think it's important to understand that there's definitely a utility and a need to integrate these organizations into the effort. However, we need to be clear about the benefit of it that it comes with, and also make sure that while there is a benefit, there are also very specific mandates for these organizations. So just because there is a benefit does not mean that there's a mandate there. So I'd like for Seth to actually expand on that more because this is something that comes up quite often.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Alicia. And I don't want this to be misconstrued that I'm speaking against AFCON or I don't like AFCON. AFCON is a great institution. It was set up to do a specific thing. It's about the Pelindaba Treaty. It's not even safeguards, for safeguards is in the hands of the IAEA. So we need to make a differentiation. We are talking about building a nuclear power program, where you are looking at bringing the needed infrastructure, both soft and hard, together, put it together in a structured way, in a structured format, to be able to build a project on. That is not a skill AFCON has. That's not a skill AFCON has. These skills are embedded within countries, within institutions, within the countries. And that's how come you can have a country like Ghana, and when IEA is even looking for experts, it doesn't look for experts in AFCON. It looks for experts within the member states. But that's where the skill set is. And that's the sovereignty of that member states to develop its nuclear power program. What AFCON can do is encourage member states to do what is needed to be done, especially in the Pelindaba Treaty, and support those member states to do what is supposed to do. So again, I think the regional approach should help us, but it has to be countries coming together to make sure that they are able to share resources and share their challenges and present the opportunities that are given to them, but not put it in an institution like AFCON. It's a great institution, but its mandate is the Pelindaba Treaty, and it needs to stay within the Pelindaba Treaty. Unless AU changes that mandate, then we need to now shift to that new mandate. But for now, I think AFCON needs to sit within its current mandate. Thank you.
Rebecca?
Yeah, more than AFCON, I see that African Union can play a significant role in terms of setting the stage within governments to be able to share infrastructure and also really policies that could be developed, and also thinking about the energy policy, how in fact it affects the infrastructure policy. So bringing those together and looking at the African Union Sustainable Goals 2063, there are some factors that African Union could play, and having a memorandum of understanding to support those activities, I think, is an important aspect. Not so much go into the national programs, but as a whole, how does the African Union, since they are heads of states, could collaborate in this area, and what are the things that they could work on as a regional level? I think African Union could play a role in my mind.
Thank you, Rebecca. While workforce development is essential, financing nuclear projects is going to be a tall task. What is the source of funding or financing these nuclear projects?
Lisa, I'm going to start turning Seth's camera on my own, but I'll start. So
Okay.
obviously that question will have a variety of answers depending on whose technology we're talking about, what type it is, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll say a broader statement. One, being very transparent and very honest, the United States and its own export credit agencies are, I would say, still relatively new to this. We just saw in 2020, I believe, where DFC rolled back its own self-imposed restriction. Exim Bank in the past few years has been greatly stepping up. And we have also USTDA in this early works, who was a forerunner in making sure that we could even be considered to be a partner, and with these countries, because they wanted to see that, we had what they call skin in the game. And this is a very stark contrast from some of our state-owned competitors that offer the entire buffet. And we simply aren't able to do that. However, I think that there continues to be a full US government thrust for us to be able to vastly improve our abilities, as well as the entry of private investment into these equations. And so I think that we're going to see more of that. I think that there's an opportunity for us to tell a better story about de-risking projects and being able to do that so that investors see these projects as attractive investment opportunities. And we will have to take these things on the continent one step at a time. The good thing is the work that has to be done well before we get to the financing piece of it spans quite a few years, so that we are not going to come into this making sure that that piece of it is totally figured out across the continent, but making sure that we're continuing along the path where we have started early enough to start to put all these other pieces in place and continue to work on that flexibility and financing, and being able, not only on a national level between partnerships, but on a multilateral development bank level, continue to try to push other entities like the World Bank and others to make sure that, in the same way that we all worked globally to support the taxonomy in the EU, that we will continue collectively and globally to push these issues so that people understand that nuclear is clean, green, and safe, and that the risk that they believe in the projects, especially early on, is something that we will continue to do better with telling the story and de-risking the projects. I think that we continue to learn lessons, and we will use the lessons learned from our global partners because we've seen people build on time and on schedule around the world, and we will all continue to learn lessons from that.
Thank you.
So just a small addition. It's a known fact that the sub-Saharan, especially sub-Saharan Africa, economies are not that big. So the traditional way of financing nuclear will not work. Currently, you will have a country like my country under an IMF program. Technically, it cannot borrow some level of money. So we need to think about a disruptive way of financing the nuclear power plants within the continent. It's possible. Currently, we receive some very good proposals that are being looked at, are being worked on, and getting close to a certain level of completion from the US industry. And it's a different way of financing the nuclear power plant. It has never been done before. And it may be a model that others can also look at and replicate. So again, we need to look at other ways of financing other than the traditional way of financing.
Thank you. I think this question is for everyone on the panel. I'm going to start with Rebecca, if she can start to answer this particular one. What is being done to raise awareness and acceptability of nuclear across the continent to increase some of the acceptability of the technology being deployed on the continent?
It's a great question. For example, we did, when the African Union Summit was held in February, we held a side event that involved universities, policymakers, and commissioners of the African Union to participate in discussion as to what are the technologies that are available, what skill sets are necessary, how could universities share this knowledge among the countries that have advanced programs. And we brought universities from all regions of Africa and policymakers to have those kind of discussions. And I think continuously our goal is through the Development Center of OECD and us to work together to get opportunities where different conferences are to be presenting those what the benefits. And it's not just the nuclear power. We have to consider that medicine is also a huge factor, that nuclear medicine is not available for a lot of countries within Africa. So we're showing the case that nuclear does not just mean power, it also means the health aspect of it as well. And IAEA is doing a lot of work in this area as well to promote activities that showcase how nuclear could be supporting clean cooking is another mechanism. So there's different ways that we could provide those opportunities, and we are working towards those.
Thank you. Seth or Alicia, do you want to add to kind of as your last set of remarks before we end?
Sure. Well, one of the efforts that I think has been very successful is that we've started with the very young people, and I've partnered with the Nuclear Energy Agency since the inception of its mentoring workshops, and we have done them both in Ghana and Kenya for high school students. The Kenya one we did virtually during the pandemic. Ghana we did last year. But I think it's important that we start to shift the paradigm of who we're talking to and what we're saying. And so therefore that communication piece and being able to talk to people just to have them understand the quality of life that nuclear as a part of an energy mix can bring. These power outages that have been happening, the fact that there are times where the power is out for hours at a time and it's cooler outside than inside of the homes. The fact that, as Seth mentioned, he gave the stats on electricity on the continent. I think that when we engage everyone, those people then become our our advocates and ambassadors and help lobby the policymakers. I think also as officials, whether we're officials in Africa or officials in another country, and I'll speak for the United States, we have to show up. And so, you know, myself, my colleagues, we're making those trips regularly. I think I average one a month or more. I've been on the continent multiple times. I think that pulling together, as we said, regional, that cooperation and showing up to have these discussions so that we are growing a core group of working level policymakers who then take that information back nationally and continue to grow interest. I think our efforts collectively, and I'm not just talking about the Department of Energy, as I've mentioned, this is an interagency effort in the United States, coupled with our academic institutions, industry, and our labs. We have really increased the visibility of nuclear. So therefore, we have to continue to really just be present, because this is something that we will have to continue to engage youth, to continue to encourage young girls and women, and then make sure that we have in our discussions and in our plan a way to make sure that culturally we're able to see if a door can be opened, that with all of that elder population, that they will start to listen and include and ready these young people to be a part of this, because there's a cultural element where the elders have the voice, and we want to make sure that that continues to make that shift as we do something that requires all hands on deck.
Thank you, Alicia. Seth?
So just a few thoughts. This goes to buttress the point that Alicia made about Clean Energy Training Center. I think when we started the Clean Energy Training Center, we were at the tail end of the COVID, so it was more virtual. And I do remember when we started, very good friends of mine called me and said, I'm not able to enter, I'm not able to register. Even though I'm able to register, I'm not able to participate. Why is this the case? And I told them that program is meant for Africans and for Africa. So the Clean Energy Training Center, when we started, had a list of lectures, not lectures, but workshops on a 2-weekly basis to open up about nuclear. How do you implement a nuclear power program? What are the various intricacies that are involved? And it was meant for Africans. The only challenge was that Africans were not participating. So we need to find a way, or we need to make it more interesting if it wasn't interesting enough to bring everybody on board. But again, this was something that was created for the African platform for Africans to engage and then make sure that they fully understand the nuclear power program, what it stands for, and how you go about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is definitely a timely discussion on nuclear energy and the African continent. There is not enough time to go through all of the very thoughtful questions that we have received. I do think, if I can put it into the atmosphere, there is a need for a follow-up webinar on nuclear energy in the continent, so that we can continue this discussion time and time again. I would like to thank our panelists and you, the audience, for tuning in on this Friday and being a part of the ANS webinar series. Thank you so much. If I can have all of the panelists on the screen, thank you very much for taking time to come and discuss with us all. Everyone, have a good rest of day.